DPS so far in the War Within has seen some drastic changes compared to what we have right now. Of course, when you're ranking DPS, it doesn't mean you want to just stack one spec just because they deal the most damage. Every class spec fills a different niche, and these rankings aren't about pure damage. With that being said, there are winners and losers, and we're going to be ranking all of this today based off of the spec's damage right now, how fun the rotation is, the design of their hero talent trees, as well as how much better the specific spec is compared to the others in its class identity. For example, because Holy Paladin is pretty much god tier right now, sadly it does lessen the value of protection and retribution because you don't want to sit here and stack a bunch of paladins over and over in your raid. So without further ado, let's dive into all the ranged DPS in the War Within and rank them from best to worst. Don't forget, if you're looking for an easy way to find your runes or level up quickly in all versions of World of Warcraft, click that link in the description below to get the Rested XP guide. It's literally the best guide out there for World of Warcraft. I promise you won't be disappointed. Click the link, support the channel, gain rewards. Okay, now starting off with the best range class in the game. I know you all know it's coming, but we got to get through it. Not even close, we have the Augmentation Evoker. This class is so beyond broken. It has been dominating the game ever since its release, and it's all for the best reasons. You bring extra armor and health to your tanks after they just recently got nerfed. You bring great mana regeneration for your healers. You vastly increase the damage of your allies by duplicating some spell effects, increasing their crit chance. And then with the integration of their new hero talent trees, it just amplified all of this even more while bringing you more DPS personally than ever. This just makes you a disgusting spec to play right now in World of Warcraft, being by far the most valuable in any group or party for any content out there. The Scale Commander hero talent tree makes your Eruption AoE after you use an empowered ability. Your bombardments reduce the cooldown of your Breath of Eons by like 30 seconds, which allows you to greatly increase your allies' damage every minute or so, while giving you a 15-second Bloodlust personally. The damage modifiers on this talent tree increase your damage by like 30% just from the hero talent tree, and we didn't even talk about the Chrono Warden yet, which is equally just as fun. For a class to have two super fun hero talent trees that are impactful is something in its own sense, but putting them on the Augmentation Evoker, which is the most wanted class in the game, with great design, class fantasy, and effects, makes this an absolute home run. There's nothing else to say. Augmentation Evoker is the #1 ranged DPS class in the entire game and the most valuable spec in the game. Now, moving on to the actual start of the list. Up first, we have the Arcane Mage. Now, if we exclude Augmentation Evoker from the game, in my opinion, Arcane Mage has got to be on the top of the overall list. Out of nowhere, transitioning from Dragonflight into the War Within, the Arcane Mage is dealing easily some of the highest damage in the game, whether it be for single target or AoE DPS, with a rotation that was once incredibly complicated, but now turned into something very simple and more fun than ever, leaving me in literal shock on how fantastic this spec is. There's no more clunky windows where you have to generate all your arcane charges again, because your arcane missiles now have the opportunity to gain charges themselves. You have super fast, heavy hitting cooldowns like Touch of the Magi and Arcane Surge that are on a low cooldown. There's a wide variety of builds that all perform well with this spec, and everything seems to just be lining up for the Arcane Mage in particular, man. When it comes to the hero talent trees, I will say the Spellslinger is the best option here for Arcane Mage as of right now, simply because it doesn't impede on your rotation, and it's just passive damage that adds a ton to the class overall to enemies, while, you know, also looking visually very nice and impactful. Recently, the Sun Fury hero talent tree did see some buffs, but it just doesn't really mesh well with Arcane too much. Overall, it's just better for Fire Mage, but nevertheless, not counting Augmentation, Arcane Mage has my personal vote for being the most fun and dominating range DPS in the game right now, and any Mage spec overall would be a fantastic option to main heading into the War Within. Next up on my list, to my very big surprise, believe it or not, we have the Elemental Shaman. If you would ask me a month ago about what I would think about this spec now, I would have never guessed it would have been in this good of a spot. Elemental Shaman recently just got a very big rework, making the talent tree design for the spec very, very simple and easy to progress through. You pretty much have two build options, whether it be a lightning-based shaman, constantly throwing out lightning bolts and chain lightning, and using the Stormbringer hero talent tree, really emphasizing that Emperor Palpatine vibe, constantly throwing out lightning. And then you have your fire-based shaman that's heavily emphasized on using lava burst, spreading your flame shocks around, using your fire elemental, and summoning your ancestors using the Farseer talent tree, which just recently got buffed massively. And then also the Stormbringer hero talent tree did just see some nerfs, but it wasn't really particularly doing well for Elemental, which was very weird to see. But overall, both of these hero talent trees are very fun, engaging, great gameplay designs that you could play on one DPS spec, which is very, very rare so far in the War Within. Right now, Elemental Shaman is easily doing some of the highest DPS in the entire game, and it's without a doubt one of the greatest specs you can main heading into the next expansion. On top of it, Shaman recently just got a raid-wide buff, making you even more valuable to a party than ever, and all three Shaman specs are performing very, very well right now, so you might run into the problem of maybe not being able to join a Mythic Plus or raid group because there might be one or two Shamans in there already, and it might just be overflowing. But as of right now, individually, Elemental is performing the best out of all three of the Shaman specs, which does give you the edge. Next up, you guessed it, we have another Mage spec, and it is the Fire Mage. I'll say it right off the bat. Fire Mage definitely is one of the harder range caster DPS to pick up and learn, and if you can think maybe 3 to 4 or 5 global cooldowns ahead in prepping your damage, you can really excel and deal nuclear numbers with this spec. Just recently, they did receive some big buffs across the board, as well as to Living Bomb by 100%, turning your AoE damage literally into something nuclear. It might be so high that it's actually broken, and the recent buff to it might have just overtuned it by a mile, so this is something we're going to have to keep track of, but this isn't the reason why Fire Mages were here. They were up this high before even these buffs. The rotation with Fire Mage easily has to be one of the most engaging and fun in the entire game. You now have Living Bomb back tied to your Fire Blast. You're tossing out instant heavy hitting AoE Phoenix Flames. You're in combustion most of the time due to your heavy cooldown reduction in Sun King's Blessing, which, you know, instantly puts you back into combustion after hard casting a pyro. It just feels so good. Then you have the hero talent trees tying all this together with your brand new Frostfire hero talent tree, which integrates powerful Frostfire spells into your rotation passively, like having your Meteor additionally call down a Comet Storm, your Phoenix Flames to automatically cast Ice Nova, your Fire Blast to automatically cast Improved Living Bombs, and, you know, you're tossing out instant Frostfire bolts that can deal up to 1,000,000 damage in AoE, and it just feels so good. The Fire Mage is so incredibly fun and explosive, and if you're a player that is advanced and can think ahead and micromanage your rotation properly, Fire Mage should absolutely be an option for you heading into the War Within. Okay, next up on the list, we have our very first Warlock spec being the Affliction Warlock. And man, oh man, this class has seen very nice improvements since previous expansions, being very simple and absolutely dominant in the damage meters as of right now. Use your Seed of Corruption to spread your Corruption ability, which hits very hard. Use your Vile Taint to spread your Curse of Agony. And before you know it, within a couple global cooldowns, you have full dots on pretty much everything around you, and you're spamming Malefic Rapture to just nuke them all at the same time. It is very, very satisfying. They also got a talent tree rework and class condensing. It's made the spec so much more simple and way more fun, making it accessible to pretty much just about any player out there if you're even new to the Warlock. And then moving on now to their hero talent trees, you got the Hellcaller hero talent tree, which is probably the go-to option as of right now, even after the recent nerfs. You get a brand new damage over time effect that's called Wither that replaces your old Corruption ability that deals a crap ton of damage to enemies and feels very impactful. Not only that, you're also granted a powerful 1-minute cooldown through this hero talent tree that gives you haste and deals additional damage to all your enemies affected by your damage over time effects. Not only does it give you a new and improved version of Corruption now called Wither, it also gives you a 1-minute cooldown, a nice 1-2 punch to tie in with your other abilities as well. Listen, when it comes to the Warlock specs, as of right now, Affliction Warlock is by far on top, in my opinion, in terms of rotation and design, and it's just absolutely on top in terms of pure raw damage. Listen, the Warlock is one of the safest classes you could pick heading into the new expansion, and Affliction Warlock in particular is a fantastic option if you're looking for a damage over time effect based spec. Moving on to our very first Hunter spec, we have the Marksmanship Hunter. And honestly, this spec just reminds me a lot of Fury Warrior, but as a ranged DPS. It's just simply there to deal a shit ton of damage, and it's not really messing around with other than that. I will say that it is one of the highest damage in the game when it comes to AoE, but single target Marksmanship does lag behind unless you completely spec for it. The rotation of using multi-shot to proc trick shots and, you know, pairing it with explosive shots at once, as well as volley and rapid fire barrage, you deal insane AoE damage, and that's not even pairing it with the best part of the spec, which is their hero talent tree, the Sentinel. Pretty much your attacks have a chance to apply Sentinel to a target, stacking up to 10 times, and then there's a chance for each of those stacks to be consumed and deal a bunch of damage. The hero talent tree is very well designed for AoE damage. You have Symphonic Arsenal to make your multi-shots deal more AoE damage, as well as Lunar Storm, which summons an owl to an area to deal good damage to targets as well in an area. Recently, they just buffed the Dark Ranger hero talent tree, which does help marksmanship in the single target department for raids, so we will have to see if this continues to be better as the testing moves forward, but as of right now, I'm not too sure. Listen, from a class perspective, I would say that marksmanship and survival are very close and neck in terms of viability, and beast mastery is the one lagging behind significantly. So you really shouldn't have too many problems when it comes to trying to find a group as a hunter, and there being other issues with other hunters in a group. Overall, the Hunter is a very heavy damage dealing range DPS that is straightforward to use and a very fun hero talent tree design. And speaking of damage over time, we got to talk about the Shadow Priest, because yes, this class saw some adjustments and pruning as well, and all for the better, because what was once slammed with a bunch of buttons is now condensed and feels very, very simple and easy to play. They stepped away from the Mind Seer gameplay style and simply just embedded all of your damage over time effects to instantly apply to your targets when you toss out your Shadow Crash. At that point, you're passively tossing out your shadowy apparitions, dealing heavy damage over time, building up your insanity, and you're getting ready for those big, devouring plague dump windows to keep you in void form as long as possible, which allows you to deal significantly more damage. So overall, the rotation is very straightforward and fun, while also feeling impactful, and you're always building towards something which is great for a caster DPS. Their hero talent trees, however, are the absolute star of the show. It's very rare, but for Shadow Priest, both of their hero talent trees are super fun, very impactful and engaging, while also bringing a wide variety of gameplay. You have the Archon hero talent tree, which emphasizes your Halo ability, making it an offensive cooldown, dealing more damage and buffing you during that time. And then you also have the Void Weaver hero talent tree, which after you use Void Torrent, you send out an Entrophic Rift that looks very, very cool. That looks amazing when it comes to visuals, and it deals a ton of damage the more you use your Devouring Plague while it is active. So the Shadow Priest right now is very, very fun as a caster DPS, and a lot of players vote them for having the best designed hero talent trees in the game, and it's all for good reason. I do think this class needs some adjustments when it comes to damage as well as their talent trees, because it's a little bit of a mess. I also will say up front, I don't think Priest is overall a very safe class to main right now in this moment, but Shadow Priest individually is performing better than the other two specs. Not only that, you bring fantastic utility as a Shadow Priest, and above average damage numbers, pretty much guaranteeing you a raid spot or a mythic plus spot for any group out there. Moving on now to, believe it or not, the last mage spec, we have the Frost Mage. Now I'm gonna be honest here, all three mage picks are pretty damn good right now, but if one had to technically be the worst, I guess it is the Frost Mage. Frost Mages generally deal pretty good single target and AoE damage. You have your really heavy, hitters with Glacial Spike. You have your Comet Storm that you pair on top of your Flurry debuff to get that automatic crit going. You have instant blizzards after shooting out a frozen orb. You have AoE Ice Lances. I mean, you have a lot at your disposal to deal good damage in just about any situation out there. It just feels like there's too many procs going on, and you're not 100% sure on which is the best to choose at a certain time. So the funny thing is your single target and AoE rotation kind of stays the same, which feels decent when you don't really know what to do as a mage. But of course, you bring solid utility as well as, Frost Mage also particularly bringing really, really good crowd control with all their slows and, controlling those dense pack of mobs. Recently, Frost Mage did see some buffs to just about every damage spell at their disposal, including the Sun Fury talent tree, which, to be honest, doesn't feel as good as Frostfire, where, with Frostfire hero talent tree, you toss out those AoE Frost Bolts for like 1,000,000 damage, which feels really, really good, and you can get to the point where you're popping your Icy Veins and have like a 1-second cast AoE Frostfire Bolt spam, and you can deal easily over 1,000,000 DPS just AFK spamming that, which is really, really funny. Listen, overall, I think Frost Mage is quite simply just middle of the pack, man. Nothing great, nothing too bad. If you compare it to the other two mage specs, of course, you're going to run into problems, but as a DPS spec individually on its own, it's nothing to be ashamed of and a really, really great choice heading to the expansion. Okay, now moving on to where the list sadly starts to droop down a little bit in terms of value, we do have the Demonology Warlock. I will say right off the bat, I think Demonology has one of the coolest class fantasies in the entire game. However, when push comes to shove and quick TLDR of the class, it's very complicated and not too rewarding for it. There are much more simple classes in the game like Arcane Mage, Elemental Shaman, Affliction Warlock, Marksmanship Hunter. Shit, even Frost Mage that deals similar or more damage by being way, way, way more simple. The whole idea is that you toss out certain combinations of demons that you summon to pair with your offensive cooldown, which is your Demonic Tyrant, who will then increase the duration of all those said demons that you summon, and then you deal as much damage as possible with all of them out at once. Listen, personally, I have always loved tracking multiple things at once and having rewarding gameplay for it, but the thing is, it just doesn't feel that rewarding, sadly, and the damage doesn't feel 100% there. When it comes to your hero talent tree, the only one that seems worth it is the Diabolist. The more soul shards you spend, the more demons you summon from the Legion to help you in battle, which I guess it feels okay. Every once in a while, you do get a very powerful Ruination proc, which turns your Hand of Gul'dan into like a nuke and does some significant damage. But other than that, it's just okay at best because of how complicated Demonology Lock is and the really, really high skills floor and ceiling, while also bringing kind of average DPS. This is the reason why this spec is at this spot in this list. It's just a lot of risk, not too much reward. Okay, when it comes to the Devastation Evoker, we need to get one thing very clear. The only reason it's this low on this list has nothing to do with the spec individually. It's just that Augmentation is the best spec in the entire game right now, which means Devastation is always going to be shunned and looked down upon as a DPS. The damage this spec can deal is surprisingly pretty damn good. Once again, you're caught up in the rare scenario with the DPS spec that has two nice hero talent tree designs and are both really impactful and feel great to use. You have the Scale Commander hero talent tree that focuses more on AoE disintegrates and constantly using your Deep Breath ability to deal massive AoE damage. And then you have the Flame Shaper hero talent tree that focuses more on red damaging abilities, enhancing your damage on abilities like Fire Breath, Pyre, and even giving you a brand new red ability called Engulf that deals massive damage to enemies, depending on how much damage over time effects you have on them. Personally, I like this one a little bit better, but honestly, it's a little bit sad that Devastation Evoker is stuck as the, black sheep of the Evoker DPS family, and it's probably going to stay that way unless this DPS spec starts quite literally dealing the #1 damage in the game. It just can't compete with Augmentation right now because the spec is just broken, and really nothing can compete with it. So overall, I think it's a very fun DPS spec. I will tell you up front that people might end up asking you to play Augmentation if you're planning on, clearing content in some of the highest levels possible. Now, it pains me to say this because the Destruction Warlock actually has a very fun and fluid rotation while being paired with a really well-designed hero talent tree that feels impactful, and there are moments when it hits like a nuke. I guess the sad fact is that Destruction Warlock just simply isn't hitting hard as some of the other classes outside of those windows, and it feels like it's lagging behind. They did recently just get some buffs towards Rain of Fire and Channel Demon Fire, but even then, it isn't enough unless there are significant numbers of enemies due to, Rain of Fire's high AoE ceiling and cap that it has. Listen, a quick TLDR is that Destruction Warlock is a very straightforward builder, spender type of caster, and your spenders are either heavy-hitting Chaos Bolts or mediocre Rain of Fire damage. One of my favorite aspects is when you summon your Overfiend after you use 10 Soul Shards. I love when you summon out that demon, he just pumps out a bunch of Chaos Bolts for you. It is very, very nice. When it comes to the hero talent trees, both of them are really fun and effective. You have your, Diabolist, which you spend your Soul Shards to summon random demons from the Legion. They aid you in battle, and they amplify some of your spell effects. One of those is when they amplify your Chaos Bolt into Ruination, which hits like a nuke, and it is very, very satisfying to use. And then you have the Hellcaller hero talent tree, which is fantastic because it upgrades your Immolate into the Wither ability, which is easily applied to everyone in groups due to your Cataclysm, spreading your Immolate instantly, which is really, really nice. Listen, design-wise, gameplay-wise, and levels of fun, Destruction Warlock has got to be one of the best up there. That is not the class's problem. It simply comes down to, sadly, the fact that the other two Warlock specs are performing better, and the damage for Destruction doesn't feel there yet. I think their damage knob needs to be tweaked up and dialed a little bit to be able to compete with some other classes, but overall, I don't think it's a bad class. I do think Warlock is one of the safest in the game to pick, so you shouldn't feel bad if you really like Destruction Warlock. Moving on now to our next range DPS, we have the Balanced Druid. Balanced Druid is amongst one of the more simple DPS classes in the game. I'm going to say it up front though, the Balanced Druid has a lot of problems, man. Their class-specific talent tree is very outdated. It's really, really poorly designed. They're probably the squishiest DPS class in the game. The Balanced Druid specific talent tree design is in itself is just full of a bunch of 2-point nodes, and it's very, very strict talent tree. It doesn't leave a lot to, creativity and other build designs because they're constantly chokeholded into specific builds. Their damage isn't awful. It's just nothing to brag about, considering that when it comes to their hero talent tree, the biggest benefit about it is the cooldown of your Fury of Elune coming up quicker and the damage increase to your Starfire. It just doesn't feel great considering that your Starfire ability, which is a builder, ends up being one of your top damaging abilities. It's kind of like if you're a rogue and your mutilate ability is like your top 2 or 3 damage abilities. It just doesn't feel right. The spenders for balanced druid just don't feel impactful. I really would want them to maybe reduce the amount of spenders that you pump out, but increase their damage by like 200 or 300% to make them feel more impactful when you use them, because right now you can have like 4 or 5 starfalls active and the damage just doesn't feel as good as some of the other classes out there. They're down a hero talent tree because Keeper of the Grove right now is almost useless and Elun's Grace is the only option. They're in desperate need of a redesign. The rotation is outdated, it's a little bit boring, and the only great thing going for this spec is the animations and sound design, because holy shit, they're some of the best in the game in my opinion. Other than that, Druid is in desperate need of some love, and so hopefully they get it before the launch or even a little bit after post-launch. Now moving on for the final DPS back on this list, we have the Beast Mastery Hunter. Now if this list was purely made about DPS, the Beast Mastery Hunter will be a little bit higher, but thankfully that's not the case here. The spec's damage absolutely wasn't its problem. It's just quite simply, the spec does not feel fun and the rotation feels super, super bland. The hero talent tree selection is pretty universally known as being the worst 2 hero talent trees in the game that both feel, you know, very boring and unimpactful. You have the Dark Ranger hero talent tree that you literally can't use because you don't get enough procs or remotely enough damage from it. So you're ending up forced to be using the Pack Leader hero talent tree, which is almost entirely passive, barely enhances visuals, literally makes the class feel the exact same as it did before. Overall, this easily has to be the worst design of any hero talent tree out there, and one of the most boring designs in a class overall. The biggest upside about this spec is that it's very, very straightforward class to play, and if you're a new player, it can definitely be for you. Compared to the other Hunter specs, it is by far the worst out of the 3. That is something to take into consideration as well if you're really interested in BM. Overall, Hunter's not a bad spec, but Beast Mastery is not doing good. But okay, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap up today's video on our ranged DPS in the War Within beta, so far being ranked from best to worst. On screen here is a nice little visual for you to just cut to. If you don't have too much time to watch the video, if you want to go find your spec and the timestamps, remember, this is based off not only the spec's damage overall, but the fun, the rotation basis of the spec, the integration of the new hero talent trees, and how impactful and good does the class spec feel. But listen, if you guys enjoyed the content, we have a ton of other videos to help you get through the War Within, like these 2 right here. And since you're already here, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button to join the Combat Kids family today, because every subscriber matters. Thank you all so much for enjoying the video. I'll see you in the next one.